All right, what's up, party people? My name is Sunny Ray. This is the Sunny Ray Show. Really excited. Today, I'll be bringing on Josh. He's a 25-year enterprise technology operator who has lived through every major shift since the internet and is now building at the AI layer where the most important business decisions actually get made, the boardroom. So this is fascinating. I think what he's working on is really interesting, really important. And I will now bring him on stage. Hey, Josh, how are
Hey,
you?
Sonny. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Cool. So, Josh, just to kick it off, do you want to maybe share a little bit about, is it Oroclar? Am I saying it? How do you pronounce it?
Oraclar, like Aura, golden, and Claris, clarity.
Got it.
And that's the risk you run into when you let AI name your company.
Good one. Good one. Hey,
Yeah.
Josh, do you want to maybe just kick us off? Just to, maybe a paragraph or two for now. We'll keep it short, but then, like I said, we'll come back to it near the end of the interview again. But yeah, it'd be good to, I don't know, just yeah, tell us what you guys do.
Yeah. So, Oraclar is, literally what you just described, AI for the boardroom. So the challenges that today's board members face, there's a lot of complexity in the boardroom and lots of information that they need to consume and comprehend and contextualize and challenge and collaborate around, and then be able to have confidence in their decisions. And what Oraclar is all about is helping each of those board members who have a diverse set of experience and expertise, this may be their first board, this could be their last board, they may be on one board, they may be on too many boards, and everything in between. And it's about thinking about them in their roles and the duties that they have and their responsibilities, and giving them the tools to be able to understand the information that they're being presented with, to make sense of it, to understand it. What are the right questions that they should be asking to really improve the sort of quality and level and preparedness in their governance duties and responsibilities.
Yeah, it's such an interesting. There's a little bit of a lag, Josh. I'm not sure if you're noticing it, but yeah, I don't know if there's a way to switch up your data a little bit or something, but if not, it's fine.
Let's see, maybe I'm broadcasting too many pixels. Give me just a moment.
That's fine. We can keep moving. Okay, cool. So yeah, I have so many questions in terms of how AI plays out in the boardroom. But again, I don't know, like I kind of find that talking about the tech and the business side of things falls a bit flat unless there's a bit of context around, the person. So you were mentioning, I think, right, that you grew up in on Long Island. I guess first question, what kind of kid were you back then? Were you what were you obsessed with before any of this like consulting and startup stuff?
That's a funny question. I was actually talking to one of my best friends from growing up yesterday, and so he's probably a better person to ask, and so we should have sent him the stream. But I was literally the exact same person I am today. This balance of sort of inquisitive and asking questions. Always interested in technology. From when I was a kid, I had my Atari 400 computer that my uncle, who worked for Atari at the time, this was the 70s and early 80s, that he gave me for me to learn on the membrane keyboard. And I graduated to an Atari 800, and I wrote my first computer program I think I was in third grade. It was a social studies. It was Notebook LM, which before it was Notebook LM, I think. And so that was also the last computer program that I ever wrote myself, or code that I wrote, other than a little bit of tinkering. But in high school, yes. I mean, it was a balance of, I was playing lacrosse, or at least attempting to play, and that was a big thing, for us out on Long Island. And swimming and lifeguarding and just hanging out and living on the North Shore of Long Island, near the close enough to the beach, and had a very normal suburban upbringing. Probably the other side of it is my parents. My dad was an entrepreneur, and so that was always something that I wanted to do. Had some small businesses that I had with one of my other friends growing up, over the years as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so then you picked healthcare entrepreneurship, right, as your undergrad major at Emory. So that's an oddly specific choice for a 19-year-old. What pulled you towards both like healthcare? Well, I guess you just answered the question around entrepreneurship, but both sides kind of at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, and I've always had that entrepreneurial, like, want to build businesses side of me. But I also really, growing up, I was always really interested in healthcare and medicine. And I very much was a pre-med when I got to school. And so for me, what was the way that I could put those things together, be a pre-med, but also be a business major? And, I was intending on going to medical school. I wound up not going to medical school. I wound up going to School of Public Health, and then kind of getting, sort of my career path took a different direction. But yeah, it was definitely, I don't know if I was the only one, but certainly, as an undergrad, I was making my own major in the business school.
And then you stayed at Emory for a master's, right, in public health right after. So, most kids around that age, they want to go make money. What were you trying to like learn? I guess that kind of the BBA didn't earn you or didn't
Yeah,
give you.
I mean, look, the honest answer is I didn't get into medical school the first time that I applied. Partially because I was a business major, and partially because I probably had too much fun freshman year. And so I spent, so I have two children now, one who's a 21-year-old who just is going to be a senior at Emory, and one who just finished his freshman year at Syracuse. And for them growing up, there were basically, three rules. One was don't do dumb things. The second was be nice to everybody. And the third was don't F up. And the third one was probably me freshman year, and like really focus and don't let things get away because it can have long-term implications. And so, it definitely changed my career path, for better or worse. I think probably for the better, but medicine is always something that I'm still interested in and passionate about.
And then you walked straight into Deloitte Consulting in '98. So what did big firm consulting teach you that, you still use today? And like what habits did you have to kind of unlearn later?
I mean, that feels like a loaded question. I would say, I'm a huge advocate of consulting coming straight out of school. And, for me, it was the most phenomenal experience coming out of public health, and into the healthcare consulting practice at Deloitte. And for me, it was extremely formative in terms of how to conduct myself in business, how to analyze, how to work, how to build presentations, how to think through problems, how to analyze lots of information and data, how to work with other people. And frankly, the culture at Deloitte, certainly at the time, and I like to think that it's kind of carried through, was really about making other people successful. It was, you're taking a bunch of smart, motivated kids, 20 somethings, and you're putting them with really seasoned business people, and with oversight and with experience, and you had this whole hierarchy of managers and senior managers and partners and other things that, for me as a consultant, I learned a tremendous amount about how to, sort of how to approach business and solve these business problems. But even for the clients, it was about how do you make them successful with these engagements. And so, I look back, I was there 7 years. I left just after my first kid was born, because I didn't want to travel all the time. But it was, I learned a ton there. And so I wouldn't say that I had to unlearn anything from that. It was more that actually helped me to really understand the dynamics and get exposure to senior executives, and learn from them. and C-level, and C-level executives, and even how we were preparing for the board when they needed to make decisions.
Interesting. So, and then after Deloitte, you went to WebMD, right? That was essentially what, like the first real wave of the internet hitting healthcare. What did you see inside that company that most people on the outside miss?
So, at the time, this was 2005, and the world was changing, right? So the world was changing from, and the world of advertising was certainly changing, but all how we as consumers were all changing how we like consumed information. Where were we getting things? Where did we go for our questions? And so I wanted to go work on the internet. And so I wound up leaving Deloitte saying, all right, I'm going to go work in an internet company. And it turns out it was a $3 billion publishing company that published content on the internet. But it was a great opportunity for me to learn, what were these new dynamics like? How were consumers interacting, finding information? How can you message them? How could you advertise to them? How could you understand what some of their intent was by looking at some of the web analytics? And then because it was WebMD, they also had Medscape. And so, still this sort of like healthcare theme. How did you engage physicians and other medical and healthcare professionals, and how were they learning, and how was that changing, and how could you deliver messages and information in a different way? Because otherwise doctors were learning from medical textbooks, or they were learning from journals that were coming once a month. There was not the steady stream of news in the same way, back in the 90s, in the same, or the 80s, right? In the same way, and certainly far before WebMD and the Medscapes and those types of sites came around. And so, figuring out how do you engage, and how did expectations change of the consumers and professionals who are also consumers of how to get information, I think was really informative for me in terms of then my next couple of steps in my career.
And then you jump from a big internet company to a kind of like a tiny mobile startup, right? Called Xtify. Most people go the other way. So what made you take that risk?
If anybody's talked to me, when they hear me tell this story, I say, I wanted to see if my BS was as good as I thought it was. So I wanted to go to a real startup and to see if I could build a real products and a real company. And so I had this sort of itch this sort of entrepreneurial itch that I had, and this technology itch. And so Xtify was again, another transition from where, if WebMD was from offline to online, Xtify was now the iPhones and the Androids had just come out. And so now Facebook was still a website, and most of the major brands were still figuring out what were they going to do on mobile. And the rest of the world was saying, I don't know if I need my email on my phone, or I definitely don't need a camera on my, what is all this stuff, right? But obviously that's all expectation for us now. But it was sort of right at that time where everything was changing. And so it was another sort of great experience, for me to really empathize with the changing expectations of the consumer, the professionals and the consumers, and how they want to interact, and how they would get their information, or get communications, or behave, and what all of those possibilities were. It was also a real sort of transformative change. Xtify, the use case was, I'm walking by a Starbucks and you get a push notification with a coupon to come in and get a coffee. So location-based, behavioral-based messaging down to the device, or to your target consumer. And we did it based on location. And so there was this whole thing around privacy was a big issue, and did people want to have their share their location? And so there was as now we share our location in all kinds of different ways, in our cars, and our phones, and our AirTags, and all these other things. And so watching all of that happen, and how people's perceptions kind of change and evolve over time was pretty fun.
The Nextify got acquired by IBM in 2013, right? So I guess from the inside, like, what did that acquisition actually feel like the moment you knew it was real?
I mean, it was chaos, for sure. We were a smaller company that had really made a more significant name that let's say exceeded the sort of the number of people in the company at the time. So we had a reputation in the market. We had some incredible enterprise customers. We were delivering sort of great capabilities. But now, if you've ever been through an acquisition process, especially with a big company like IBM, the story that I tell all the time is, we were we were a bigger company than that, but the four people who were in the know and kind of, sort of, known under the tent, we went to due diligence with IBM, and they brought 50 people in person and 50 people on the phone. So, the idea that we were this company and we had to now transition, and in some cases we had to create some of the business processes and documentation and other things that, as a smaller, sort of a smaller venture-backed company in the I guess 2012, 2013, and then to be able to sort of fit that into the big machine that was IBM, it was a challenge, but we figured it out. And I honestly went kicking and screaming, a little bit, because we were in this fun environment in a loft in Soho, and there was a modeling agency on the floor above us, and there were all these other startups, in the rest of the building, and it was fun. And sort of taking that company and then going into how I perceived IBM at the time, of this kind of like big behemoth, which it's a big company, but it's actually, there's small organizations inside of it where we integrated in, and it turned out to be a sort of a fantastic experience for me.
And then you spent close to a decade at IBM, mostly in Watson. And by the way, as you and I were speaking about last time, Watson felt like the first real AI, no? Like what we're all experiencing now at scale. I just remember that Jeopardy sequence so clearly. Do you know what I'm
Yeah.
talking about?
Yeah, I think it felt like it, right?
There was actually you in the back answering those questions? No, no, I'm kidding.
What? Say that again?
Like, it wasn't you answering the questions in the back, was it?
No, 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 no. Yeah,
No, I'm kidding.
and I mean, like, I think it was pretty amazing, what IBM was able to do with Watson. Certainly, the Jeopardy was, and I'm not an IBM scholar, but I was one of 100,000 people in the company, but or more maybe, but the that was great. There will and probably are case studies about how IBM got a little bit ahead of itself with our marketing and our cognitive computing, and and effectively AI. And I think what we found was that clients were looking for the Watson in the Watson tools, right? And I think you're seeing a lot of that with Microsoft right now, where Microsoft is, they have 30 different copilots, right? And so every product gets its own copilot. I think it's all coming together, but there was a race to build little assistants and copilots and other things, because you want to sprinkle the AI all over the place. And so there's taking existing software and sprinkling the AI on top and figuring out how do you apply those use cases. What are those use cases and how do you apply them? I think, again, sort of we're seeing that with Microsoft, but but I want to give them credit. Not that they're asking, but I opened up Excel the other day, and there was a little copilot in Excel, and this time I was able to click the little copilot and tell it to, hey, can you analyze this spreadsheet, and can you help me put together this model that does X, Y, or Z? And it kind of did it, right? And so I don't know if that's OpenAI on the back end, if that's what Microsoft is doing, but it we've been able to do that with Claude and with ChatGPT for a while, but actually doing it inside of a Microsoft product, I think was kind of it was impressive, what it was able to do. I back up now to IBM. IBM was trying to do the same thing, and it was hard. It was a lot harder at the time. And some of what we're doing was the machine learning. We had great data scientists and really cool technologies, but we didn't have we had a little bit of the transformers later, sort of in my time there. But it didn't move as fast as I think the consumer or the sort of the buyer expectation was of the IBM software products that had the Watson name. And that's kind of the learning, which is, how do you find that balance? How do you get to market quickly? How do you sort of set the vision, but how do you also deliver on come close to meeting the expectations that you've now created? And that's an important lesson, I think, for all kinds of companies and at all different sort of points in time.
When did you stop thinking of AI as just like a tool you sold into enterprises and started kind of thinking of it as a thing that would essentially rewire how enterprises actually run?
I mean, even in the IBM days, I mean, that was the goal. It was never, and this is kind of classic. We spent a lot of time at IBM design thinking, and we had real sort of design teams and UX researchers, but really empathizing with the needs of the user of the software, or and where was the value, and how did you create the value? What were the problems that you were actually solving? I sort of joke about the sprinkling the Watson on top. That was sort of true, right? But that's just a shorthanded way of saying, how do we actually really sort of bring value through the technology? How do we change the way that the work gets done? And ultimately, that's what I think we were trying to do there. That's what I'm trying to do now with my current company as well. Is that like constantly there's this evolution and now revolution in technology, and how do you apply these kind of base technologies in new ways to solve business problems? And now to go all the way back to my Deloitte days, like, what did I learn? I learned as is. I learned to be design of systems and processes and the technologies that you need. And you did a gap analysis and you figured out, well, how do you get there? And from a people, process, technology perspective. And I think that holds true to this day.
Super interesting. So I guess what did you see inside? So you moved over to A&M, right? And you were a managing director there. It was, again, pure consulting again, but life sciences. Well, why go back to consulting after a decade? But I guess my follow-up there was going to be around, what did you see inside boardrooms, right, during those years that kind of planted the seed for what you're building now? Was it a client, or was it a pattern across many?
Yeah, the A&M, the time in A&M was a great learning experience for me. I think that it's a sort of a power of network and long-term relationships. And so I went to go work with one of the partners that I worked with at Deloitte when I was there early on. And so that's how I wound up back in consulting. He called me up and told me that he was building a life sciences consulting practice and asked me to come help him do it. I'd been out of consulting for a long time, but he's like, I know what you know, and let's do this together. So that was a great experience, from that perspective. And in sort of, in that role, we did a bit of work with private equity, and then with public companies and private companies as well. And a lot of work supporting the governance, supporting the board. And in so many of those interactions, what was sort of obvious or apparent at the time is that the board, and when I'm talking about Oracle in the pitch, it's very much based on some of these experiences, which is the board members you put together a diverse board for a reason, right? With a diverse set of experiences and expertise, and you have supply chain experts, and you have finance experts, and you have marketing experts, and clinicians, or in universities you have folks with money, and you have folks with perspective, and you have folks with connections, and you have people that understand education and or support the mission in one way or another, clergy, like all kinds of folks. And but they in many cases they're on this board, and when people think about the board from the outside, they're like, okay, this is a group of experts, right, that are at the top of their game. They're at the the sort of senior in their career. And I would say of all of the board members that I've interviewed, especially as I was really working on this idea, the number one thing that people said was that they were afraid. 99% of them, literally, I'm afraid of asking a dumb question, right? And so everybody has a little bit of imposter syndrome, and everybody has a different perspective. And the thing is, not everybody is supposed to understand everything, right? But it's important in your role as a director, from a board governance perspective, to actually understand the information that's being presented to you, so that you can vote on it if you need to vote on it, or ask questions if you need to ask questions about it, and to really do perform your duty of care. So now back to your question at A&M, right? It's really about, I was seeing that you had these board members, some of whom really understood the business really well, others who were there for one reason or another, or have their own agendas or have their other things, but not everybody was able to read the deep, the sort of the 100-page consulting report that we put together about this potential acquisition, right? Or the performance report, and understand the benchmarks, right? And so how do you help sort of level the playing field a little bit for each of the directors, so that they can do the thing that they're there to do? They believe in the mission, they believe in the company, they represent their investors, they represent the student body, or the community, depending on the type of board it is. And that's really what I took away from the A&M experience.
So why does the boardroom need an AI layer?
So, for probably lots of reasons, not the least of which is, and we just talked about the changing consumer expectations from offline to online, from online to mobile, now from mobile to, to a certain extent, there's an analytics in the middle there, and big data, right? And then from that to AI, right? So, at this point, we do work with a university board, and I was sitting they invited me to sit at the boardroom table with them, and to educate them a little bit on Orklar. And first at the table, I said, I just want to ask first. I said, who at the table here has used ChatGPT or Claude or Copilot? Everybody raised their hand, right? And so, and just to understand, this is a religious-based university, and so you had people from different backgrounds, and business people, and clergy, and all kinds of other folks at the table, and so everybody raised their hand. And then I said, who used it this week, right? And literally everybody. And so now, if you don't have the tools at your that you're not making these tools available to your board, like they're all using it, right? Because and we are all using it as consumers. Like, where we used to use search to find information, we now have this expectation that we can use these LLMs to help us really understand and go deeper into the information that's being presented to us. And so that changing consumer expectation, professional expectation, I think is number one. Number two is you need to be able to do it safely, right? And so you don't want to just drop your proprietary, board materials into, pick your consumer facing LLM. You want to do it in an environment that's controlled within, for the enterprise. And then third, it's back to what we were talking about before, which is the job of being a board member, especially in a public company, is much harder. Well, I shouldn't say that, but it is extremely challenging. And, perception wise, it's probably even harder than it used to be. The risks are greater. There's a tremendous amount of complexity, from a geopolitical perspective, from a market perspective, cyber, AI, all these things that you need to think about. And so that's a lot for any individual who does this once a month, once a quarter, to come in, really wrap their head around everything that's going on with the market, with the competitors in the industry, with the company, with the product lines. What do we do here, right? And to be able to be up to speed and to really engage well. And so that's what AI is really there to do, is to allow them to engage, sort of better, deeper in new ways, maybe even with a little bit less effort.
Yeah, Josh, I think we're kind of coming up against the end of our time. I'm not gonna lie, I had quite a few more questions. So if you're maybe open to it, I'd love to have you back on, and maybe we can go deeper in terms of, just like how it all plays out inside the boardroom with the tool that you're building. And yeah, like I said, I have a whole bunch more questions, but you've been kind. Where do people go to learn more? Like, where are you in terms of the company, and then
Yeah,
also,
yeah. I mean, it's we're up and going, and we'd love for to have lots of conversations. So go to Auraclar, AURECLAR.co. That is that's our website. Lots of information there. You can sign up to meet with me or one of the folks on the team, and we can have a conversation about what it's like on your board. Could be a nonprofit, could be a private company, venture, private equity backed, public company, advisory board. We do fiduciary, non-fiduciary boards. And so, come to the website, click the button, we'll set up, we can spend a little bit of time like this and talk about it.
and just maybe help me land the plane with this last one, right? So 5 years out, what does a boardroom look like if you guys win, and what's actually, different about how decisions get made at the top of the company?
So 5 years out, the conversation in the boardroom is active. It's not passive. The people are not sitting back in their chairs and listening and being presented to. It is a conversation. It is it's hitting the goals of what every CEO wants, which is spend 80% of their time talking about the future instead of the past. It's having board members who are engaged and prepared and understand and are really helping to drive the value to the shareholders and the stakeholders in the business. Things will move. Things are going to keep moving faster. The whole world is changing. Business is changing. Hopefully for the better. Hopefully our geopolitical world is evolving and will evolve in a positive way. And so understanding all of that, taking that into account, and being ready for the sort of major disruptions that are happening because of the tools that are out there. I see that as that's what the boardroom of the future looks like going forward.
Awesome. All right, cool. Well, thank you for those listening live and all the ones in the future. Until next time, Josh, I'll bring this one to an end. Maybe hang back for like 30 seconds.
Yeah.